For me, what happened when he passed is I had this rebellion come out, which I feel grateful for. I actually started to realize my bumpers. It was rebellious. That's what, and I still, honestly, I touch my rebellion many times with grief still.
I love that term, that grief ignited your rebellion. I call it my ID gap.
I lost a lot of friends at the beginning of the grief process. It was the first time that I needed something from them and they didn't know how to give it and they got mad at me. I fully lost like 3 friends that I thought were very valuable. And I realized that the contract of our friendship was such that I was the space holder. I was the caregiver. Was your grief ugly too, my friend?
That was what was going on in my head. Just the ugliness of the grief and the use of vices was just so far beyond, who I was. Pieces of that are starting to come back to me now. I don't remember getting on a plane. I don't remember the hotel room. I don't remember speaking. I don't remember any of it.
Hello and welcome to Diamond Bridges. I'm your host, Irene Diamond. Grieving demands that we get intimate with ourselves, and sometimes that can get ugly. We lose friends, and even those in our loved ones in our innermost circles can be stunned by our comments and our behaviors. They don't recognize the real us. We're not the real us to them. Sometimes in the coping process of grief, we not only lose friends, we lose our memories. We forget what we said, the anger we felt, and the bitterness of our loss. Perhaps this is why some people choose to postpone grieving. They'd rather keep their composure and bury themselves in their work. Grieving is hard work. In this episode of Diamond Bridges, I ask my guests intimate questions about the grieving experience. Watch. Now, I do know that it's thought that sometimes people shuffle their grief under the rug a little and they put all their focus into their work. That's how we get workaholics a lot of time because, it's their way of covering up the grieving that they never did, for different types of loss. Were either of you ever like that, where you kind of forge your way into your work instead?
I fell apart. I did not. I completely fell apart. I feel like there were 2 months that are unaccounted for, even so much so that on November, I just saw this, 17th, somewhere in there, I flew to Texas for a speaking engagement. And I don't remember it at all.
Yeah.
I absolutely.
So you still went through with it?
I went through with it, but it was like less than a month. And it was earlier in November because it's like my mother's funeral was October 19th. It was like 3 weeks out. It was crazy. Yeah. And pieces of that are starting to come back to me now. I don't remember getting on a plane. I don't remember the hotel room. I don't remember speaking. I don't remember any of it.
Yeah.
I remember none of it.
So Joy, your gift is communication. You're masterful and you're a fixer. So how does it make you feel when you need the help, which you most often give to others?
I didn't even know what to ask for.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to be open. I just, I completely fell apart. I remember I was in bed for 2 months. I remember that. Wow. It was the most, after my mom passed, after my dad, and into that COVID thing, more of the same. I know I didn't ask, one thing that just came to me, I remember one of my dear friends who's now a licensed like Christian counselor. And I was saying whatever it is I was saying about, the divine. And I remember her saying, she was a friend of my mom's too, my age, but she was, a lot of my girlfriends I found had close relationships with my mom because she was just kind of that kind of chick. And she was everybody's, but she said, I wrote in my journal, how did she say it? I refuse to let you be lost. I refuse to let you get lost in this. And that was one of the most powerful things. I refuse to
Kind
let you
of
get lost.
stood in the trenches for you.
Absolutely. In the gap, right? Intercessor. And I remember little snippets of times like that. And also in Mary, so you had a brand new baby, 2 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
So that concept of, and I still have to show up for my child, that was
Right.
wrenching.
Right.
So
So
that was
Mary,
wrenching.
did you have postpartum depression?
I
I
did.
didn't.
I
Mhm.
did. I did not until I went back to work. It's interesting that you brought up the word workaholism too, because, my dad was very much a workaholic, and I didn't realize how much I mirrored him until his loss. And that was a slap in the face for me. I mean, essentially, what happened for me is when I had my child, I had 6 weeks time off, which was a gift in the startup space, kind of vomit worthy otherwise, but a gift in the startup space. And when I returned, my whole orbit had changed course, but I was still responsible for the same number of executive leadership. And it was a recipe for postpartum. So it wasn't the recipe of what they ask you. Do you have a care system? Yes, I had all of those things. I'm blessed with all of the community and all of the resources and a roof over my head and food in my belly. But regardless, what happened for me is when I came back, I went back to the same momentum that ended up really triggering horrible postpartum that mostly manifested in chronic insomnia that I'm still working with. 3 hours of sleep is like a win for me a night.
Now?
And I got to now I'm like at 5. So it's good. I'm getting there. But that was, so when my dad died, I started to really realize that I was gaining worth and value from the workplace. And in actuality, I was starting to gain worth and value from a spiritual place, for one, innate worth and value, rather than this whole drama is love, or you have to do or be or even be a mom to have some sense of value. And when he passed away, I mean, he was like top of his class, graduated a year early from orthodontic school. So he was like the president of the National Orthodontic Society. Like, he was brilliant when to the
Talking
came.
about your father.
Yes, my father. And he retired after 50 plus years of being a brilliant genius in giving people smiles, right? So he had given so much energy to, he wanted people to have a smile.
Mhm.
The energy he gave us as a family was different, and it was compartmentalized. And a lot of times we got the other end of it, but ultimately he died 1 year after retiring, and he had worked to retire. It's this story. And so quite frankly, I said, F this. I don't want to do this anymore. I am my father's daughter. And so through my grieving process, it first went into that this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm going to create with that. So it was the same thing. I was cut from the same cloth. I was still workaholic. I thought I was doing something different, but it was the exact same muscle memory. I was doing the same thing. And then I started to have a deconstruction of that. And I've only learned as of late to close as many doors as possible and let go of as many things, and to surrender, like one of our first words, to surrender to the process, and be receptive to word, and be feminine in how I approach my passion. Let me be a receptive person, that instead it's that survival. I have to do this because I'm supposed to do this, because if not, then X, Y, and Z, this terrifying fear.
Say closed doors. When you close doors.
So, I feel like I'm still eclectic, and I think that we still have diversity of the way that we show up as people and what satisfies different parts of us. But for me, there was a little bit more of like an identity crisis as to how everything came to be prior to. A lot of doors closed for me. I didn't want them to close. They closed for me. I lost a lot of friends at the beginning of the grief process. It was the first time that I needed something from them, and they didn't know how to give it, and they got mad at me. I fully lost like 3 friends that I thought were very valuable. And I realized that the contract of our friendship was such that I was the space holder. I was the caregiver. And then I asked for something that I needed, or I didn't even know how to ask. Like you said, Joy, I had no idea. But I did know that I needed something, and it was ugly. God, my grief was ugly. I was so stripped down, and I just needed someone to tell me what I needed without me saying it for freaking once, right? And then what happened is I had a lot of doors closed because they closed it, because they said, you're too much for me, or I can't be this for you right now. And that hurt. It felt like grief on top of grief on top of grief. And what it came down to is that those doors closing created space for me to be more of an expression of who I want to be, or who I always was. And then I've been noticing more in the last few months, even. I'm like, wow, like, they say you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I'm like, I'm starting to feel like the sum of those people is resonating at my core. Joy, I know that was your grief ugly too, my friend.
That was what was going on in my head. Just the ugliness of the grief and the use of vices. Was just so far beyond, who I was.
Yeah.
But you knew you were doing it too, like the vices.
If I was going to sleep, I was going to need to drink a bottle of wine.
Right.
If I was going to sleep. And so I did that. I did that for probably 2 months after my mother died. I mean, I was definitely on my way to being a friend of Bill W. I would literally, I distinctly remember I was in a space, my anxiety was through the roof. I was trying to handle the business of death. I made a note of that, because you're expected to make all these decisions and handle the business of death while you are at your lowest point. Now, thankfully, my mother, being who she is, had everything written down, who she wanted to sing what song, and she had it all together. But there's still, you got to go through that process, right? And my anxiety was through the roof. My father was struggling, and again, dementia. He just lost his bride of 52 years, and so just trying to manage him and dealing with my little brother. It was so much happening. And I remember, I don't think I ever told people this professionally, I remember calling my physician and saying, you got to give me something. I'm going nuts. I'm climbing the walls. I didn't even know that, give me some Zantax or some Adderall, give me something to chill me out. And she's like, well, you're going to need to come in for a doctor's appointment. And I'm like, what part of I'm losing my effing mind? I can't get to you. What are you talking about? And she wouldn't do it. And, I've had someone since say, well, they had to have you come in for an appointment. Whatever. I reached out. She didn't help me. And I went back to old school college. I found someone who sold clean marijuana, and I started smoking weed. My mother, she was like very unhappy. You live in Colorado. You're like, yay, whatever.
I'm like, that's old news in my state, right? It's like,
okay, for me. And then if you think about 19, I'm not certain that it was even recreational was legal.
Yeah.
I didn't care.
Yes.
But it was something that you really tried to get.
Something has to calm me down.
Yeah.
Something has, because I will jump off a bridge.
Yeah.
Something had to get me together.
And there's different forms that people do for all different things, it's, yeah.
For me, raised the way
like,
I was
I didn't
raised,
care. It's like, I didn't care.
Right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. It was just, for me, it was definitely going down a path that I wasn't supposed to go down. I wasn't raised to go down. That was,
right.
You know what I mean?
You
so now, even
2
years later, 2 years later, we're in a totally different space. But then for me, my little brother still doesn't know that. My daughter doesn't know that.
Doesn't know what?
They don't know that I turned to marijuana. to get myself together in that period of time.
Right.
Right.
Well, but some people have this modus operandi also, that they always have to have an escape. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with recreational escape, as long as it's a healthy choice,
For sure.
and you're
One thing that I can share is that, so this is so funny to kind of bring Norm into it, but my dad, being this brilliant person, always had a recreational use of marijuana, which is interesting that you brought that up.
Wow.
And something that I noticed is that grief ignited rebellion in me. So it might not have been like the same, but it was coming from the same place. I suddenly felt like, when you lose a parent, and especially when you lose a parent that is the person that maybe was the disciplinarian,
Mhm, mhm.
it was like I couldn't get away with rebellion for a lot of my life. And so I wasn't even conscious of this until a year into it, where I had more rebellious acts than in the entirety of my life.
wow.
Summed
You
into
are
the
a young adult.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It was like I was rewarded and incentivized, not explicitly, but like when he was the most present when I was exceptional, right? And so it wasn't even that he was rewarding me to be exceptional, it was just that he was present. So when I was less than exceptional, it was just mute point. So for me, what happened when he passed is I had this rebellion come out, which I feel grateful for. I actually started to realize my bumpers, which was cool. I had never known my bumpers. I was told my bumpers. So
I like that concept.
yeah, I
Mhm.
was like, oh, this is like, you told me this. Actually, I can go an inch over. Or, you know what? You told me this and I want to stay a foot in. Whatever it was, that was so I relate to you in the fact that, to go to some things, you start to understand your bumpers and it becomes a gift, but it's only in those moments that are so much more formative where it was rebellious. And I still, honestly, I touch my rebellion many times with grief still.
I love that term, that
I
grief
like that.
ignited your rebellion.
Yeah.
That really, I wrote
Yeah.
that down. I call it my ID gap. I went into ID gap, especially when they were both gone.
Oh,
You're
But
what?
once they were ID gap, it's an acronym. I don't give.
Oh,
yeah.
And I'm telling you, and there are many ways that I'm just moving through that. I mean, there was something amazing how many things. And for me, again, firstborn, type A, Capricorn, boxes, structure, rules. For me to just be like, out of gas, whatever.
Yeah.
I
right.
said it. My parents were
Yes.
like,
I see that about you too, Joy. Yeah. Yeah, the dichotomy of that.
Mhm.
And you two are so wonderful to really share your most intimate ways of coping and dealing with loss and fears.
My two guests, Mary Allard and Joy Calloway, were extremely generous in sharing their intimate realities with me regarding their grief process. Both of them actually value grieving, and I learned so much from both of them. They taught me that the grief journey produces a generous perspective. This is potent stuff. When we tie together the various episodes of Diamond Bridges and the overall development that talent drives our sense of purpose, we come to learn that the grief process generates a generous perspective toward those around us and around our very own intimate experiences. The grief process unveils our hunger, our anger, our loneliness, and our tired, outgrown perspectives. The grief process demands a resolution and drives us to get after it, compels us to determine what's next. See you again on Diamond Bridges. If you learned something new in this episode, please tune in to watch all the episodes on the topic of grief.